Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. So in this video, I want to talk about jump scares. I want to give you my top 5 jump scares. Now, how did I come to this conclusion? How did I formulate this list? I did not go online and go top 20 jump scares and then, chose 5 from somebody else's list. I didn't do that. I just thought to myself, okay, what do I consider to be a really good jump scare, right? What's the measuring stick, which we're going to talk about here in a second, because you're going to notice a pattern with these 5 that I've chosen. And then I just basically wrote down the first 5 that came to me because I didn't want to go online and look it up because then I'm being influenced by somebody else's list and somebody else's order. So I didn't want to do that, although the 5 that I've chosen do largely end up on a lot of people's lists because, come on, right? You know what I'm saying? But these were just the 5 that came to me, so I wrote them down. There's probably many more. There's absolutely many, many more. That being said, there is definitely a stigma around the term jump scare, and that is largely because one of 2 things happens. Although there probably could be many more. But I think the 2 main reasons that jump scares are usually kind of frowned upon in the horror community, generally speaking, is because, number 1, they're just not utilized correctly. They're largely ineffective. And that is because I believe there is a right way and a wrong way to utilize a jump scare. And like I mentioned, you're going to notice a pattern in my list here in a moment because I do think there is I mean, again, it's not like these rules are set in stone, but I've noticed this pattern, and I think that is largely why it affects the audience, which we'll talk about here in a second. And number 2 is, even if it is effective, right? Even if you do have one that's effective, you'll see a lot of horror movies overuse the jump scare, right? Use it as a crutch, rely on it to scare the audience. And then, so even if you did have a really good one, if you're using it all the time, every time you want to try and scare your audience, so there's like 38 jump scares in, a 90-minute movie, the novelty is going to wear off really fast. And then it's just going to get really annoying. And like, okay, obviously you don't know how to scare the audience through suspense and mood and, long drawn out, really kind of like, oh, it's just jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, jump scare. And maybe that's fine if you're a teeny bopper and it's your first horror movie, you want to, but but the older you get, it's like, okay, all right, okay, can you do something else? There's also the false jump scare, which we've seen filmmakers use a lot over the years as a crutch. It's all right to have, one in a movie or something like that, but we've seen a lot of horror movies where, there's like 15 false jump scares. Oh, it's the cat. Oh, it's Bob. Oh, it's just the broomstick. Oh, it's just the loaf of bread. I don't know. You know what I mean? We've seen that too. So, but what I believe makes a great jump scare, and you're going to notice this in my top 5 here, is a jump scare that happens unexpectedly when everything around it and everything that precedes it is generally normal. That doesn't mean that, it might not be a little eerie. The scene might not be a little eerie or, but you're not expecting it, right? It's not like there's like, a character walking down the hall and the musical sort of soundscape is building to this crescendo and it's like, and they're about to open the door, and they open the door, not like, you're anticipating it, right? You're expecting it. And sometimes we get, that's actually usually where we do get a false jump scare. And then they turn around. Oh, and there it is. We've seen a lot of that too. And sometimes those can be effective, but you usually anticipate that, right? Because we've seen it a lot. Well, I believe that a really effective jump scare comes out of nowhere. Really. I mean, you maybe subconsciously you're thinking, oh, maybe something might, you know what I mean? But really it tends to creep up on you, no pun intended. And so it's like, whoa, holy shit. And that's where I think it is really effective. But you got to leave it there, right? You have to leave it there. You can't do that 38 more times in the movie, because then you're going to water it down and it's going to become largely ineffective. So you'll notice that kind of pattern in the jump scares I've chosen here today. So let's jump right into it. Okay, number 5. From the year 2000, starring Michelle Pfeiffer and Harrison Ford, What Lies Beneath. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite Harrison Ford movies of all time. I saw it like 2 or 3 times in the movie theater when it came out. It was fantastic. Robert Zemeckis directed it. And it's great because Harrison Ford is playing against type, right? He's a bad guy in this movie. And he's fantastic in it. But the jump scare, there's a few really good ones actually in this movie. There's a great one where Michelle Pfeiffer is looking through the binoculars over at her neighbor's house. And, you know, we're looking through it's the POV as if we're looking through the binoculars. And, you know, she's scanning and scanning and scanning. And then she hits a window and he's looking right at her. That's a great jump scare. But you kind of anticipate something like that might happen. Like I remember watching it in the theater going, I think, oh yeah, okay, there it is. This nobody saw coming. And it's towards the end of the movie when Michelle Pfeiffer is drugged and paralyzed in the bathtub, right? The cat's out of the bag. We know that, you know, Harrison Ford is a bad guy now. And he's trying to kill his wife. And she's in the bathtub and he notices the necklace around her neck. And he's like, oh, what's that? There's no like creepy music. It's just like the running of the bathtub water and shit like that, right? You know? And he picks her up and he puts her over like this, and the camera's like right over here, and he's got the necklace in his hand, and he's looking at it and he's looking at it, and then he's like, And then he, you know, takes her head and puts it back. And as her face comes back into frame, because the camera's right here, as the face comes back into frame, the face is of the dead woman that he murdered, just for like a split second. And he's like, oh shit, you know what I mean? And he backs up and he stumbles and he trips and he hits his fucking face on the sink and he falls unconscious and stuff. And that was the catalyst. I mean, even though Michelle Pfeiffer is still drugged, that's the catalyst that began the process of her getting out of that scenario. But nobody saw it coming, because there was nothing that would lead you to believe that something like that was about to happen. There was no creepy music. There was no like, you know what I mean? It was nothing. It was like, oh shit, that got me, man. That got me. It's a great jump scare. It's because everything else around it is largely normal. I mean, obviously what's happening isn't normal, but I mean, there was nothing that would lead you to believe that was about to happen, or that was, you know, on the cusp of happening. Nothing at all. So, in my opinion anyway, so that is my number 5. Okay, my number 4. I mean, this could easily be number 1. And you ask me again, you know, 2 weeks from now, and maybe it will be. But as of right now, it's my number 4. But it is one of the great jump scares in cinematic history. And of course, I'm talking about the 1975 Steven Spielberg classic, Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Jaws. Yes! When Richard Dreyfuss is under the water in the scuba gear, Matt Hooper himself, and he's swimming around, and he pulls a tooth the size of a shot glass out of Ben Gardner's wrecked boat. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, yeah, but Dave, that's a scene that is very eerie and kind of suspenseful and murky. I mean, we were kind of anticipating something might happen. So that doesn't really align with kind of what you've been talking about. It's like Jeff Goldblum. But yes, but it does. And I'll explain why. Because you're thinking shark. It's a misdirect. It's beautifully done, right? You might not be thinking about this on a conscious level, but when you're watching the movie for the very first time, you're anticipating shark, right? You're always on the lookout for the shark, right? You're not expecting a human face to come out of that hole, right? You're not expecting a human body to suddenly show up, right? Because you're thinking, well, Ben was probably eaten, right? So you're not looking for Ben, right? You're on the watch and you're on the lookout for the shark. And when he pulls the tooth, tooth out of the boat and he's holding it in his hand, right? He's got it in his hand, right? And, you know, the music's kind of eerie and the water's very murky. Again, you're thinking, get the fuck out of there. There's a shark. There's a fucking gigantic great white shark out there, right? You're thinking shark, 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 shark. And then all of a sudden, Ben Gardner's face pops out of the hole and you're like, oh shit. Oh my God. I was looking for the shark. I was thinking shark, and then boom, there's a human body. You know what I'm saying? That's why it works. That's why it works. It was brilliant. It was brilliant, right? It was fantastic. One of the great jump scares in cinematic history. So although, yes, there's a little bit of eeriness, a little bit of that music, right? You know what I mean? A little of that murky underwater shit. And so it's not quite the same exactly, but it's the misdirect. I mean, that could also be another jump scare category, perhaps. I'd have to really think about if there's other examples of that. I'm sure there are. But it's done through the use of, you know, subverting the expectations of the audience. And I don't mean like the expectations like the example I gave where, you know, you open the door and there's nothing there and then you turn around. And it's a cousin of that, but that's not quite what I'm talking about. This is a bit different. So anyways, it's my number 4, but it could easily be my number 1, one of the great jump scares in cinematic history. And that's why it works. Again, you're not expecting it. Well, I mean, you might be expecting something, but you're not expecting that. All right, my number 3, man, this is a tough list. My number 3 is going to be the one of my favorite Hollywood studio release, like mainstream Hollywood studio released horror movies of the last 20 years. And that is the original Insidious, James Wan's Insidious, which I think is highly underrated. The Conjuring gets all the love. I understand why. I mean, The Conjuring, that first film, was a great mainstream Hollywood horror movie. And obviously it was more successful. The franchise is more successful. I get it. I understand it. But when I first watched Insidious in the movie theater back in 2011, because it's a 2010 movie, I think it had its premiere at, was it TIFF? Was it TIFF? Some festival in 2010, and then it got its wide release in 2011. And I went to see it in the theater, and I walked out of there fucking amped up thinking, yeah, that's my kind of horror movie. I just love, you know, the real slow burn, the nuance, you know what I'm saying? I really like it. And then of course there's payoff at the end, but I do understand that there's people out there that don't like it. Fair enough. But one of the great jump scares is in that film. And again, it's because you're not expecting it, right? You're not anticipating something like that to happen. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about, which is largely, you know, known now as the Darth Maul jump scare, because the demon in Insidious does have a bit of a Darth Maul look to him. Nonetheless, it's that moment when Patrick Wilson's character is talking to his mother at the kitchen table. His mother, played by, of course, Barbara Hershey. And she's telling this story. And, you know, there's a bit of eeriness around it. I mean, it's not like she's telling a funny story. So there is, you know, some eeriness to the scene. You know what I mean? But at no point in time did you think it was going to go from like, you know, 10 miles an hour to 150 at the drop of a hat. And that's why it works so well, because it's unexpected, right? There's that eeriness, but you know, you're kind of sitting there taking it in, soaking it in, what she's saying. You're not anticipating that to suddenly happen. And of course, what's so great about it too is that when she looks over at Patrick Wilson, there's just a split second of her reaction. So it's not like she goes like this, okay? And it just cuts on her face, and then we see what she's looking at, and then cut back to her to see the reaction. What happens is we start to see the reaction, and then we cut away from it to, we'll call him Darth Maul, you know, to Darth Maul. And it's great, because all you see is this, and that's just the way it was. You just see that, just a split second of that, and it's like, that is like, what the fuck is she, what the fuck? Like, why is she suddenly getting like, you know what I mean? And then it cuts and you see the demon go, you know, and, you know, Patrick Wilson's not even, you know, he's just like, you know, and it's just, it was so effective. It was so effective. I'm telling you, everybody in the theater was like, you know what I'm saying? It was so effective. And so definitely one of my favorite jump scares. I mean, again, you know, when you know a jump scare is coming, obviously they're less effective because you've seen the movie, you know, 8,000 times, but if you've never seen that movie and you don't know it's coming, it's really effective. You know, regardless of whether you like the movie or not, regardless of whether you think the demon looks too much like Darth Maul, I get it. But I think there's a lot of shit in that movie that is really effective. And that's one of them because you don't expect it, right? There's nothing that precedes that moment, you know, that real moment that leads you to believe that this is about to happen, that we're about to go from 20 to 150 miles an hour, right? You know what I'm saying? And that's why it's so effective. And it lasts like a fraction of a second, right? And Patrick Wilson's not even reacting to it, you know, but it just to see Barbara Hershey's face when she's like, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's just that split. You're like, what the fuck is she looking at? What's going on? What's happening? Oh my God. You know what I'm saying? It's so good. It's so good. So that's my number 3. Okay. It's time for my number 2. Not that number 2. Get your mind out of the gutter. Look, any of these movies on this little list could be easily in different orders. Like ask me again tomorrow and maybe my number 2 is my number 1, or maybe my number, speaking of bathrooms, maybe my number 1 is number 4, or like whatever, right? I mean, like they're so great. They're so great. Anyways, today, this is number 2. We're going all the way back to 1990 for another one of the great jump scares in cinematic horror history. And that is, of course, The Exorcist III, starring George C. Scott, or Legion, as it should have been called. And this is a great. I mean, look, for all intents and purposes, it is a sequel to The Exorcist, but it's not directly related. I mean, it's not like we're following Reagan again and, you know, we're moving kind of on. It's a story that's being told in the same universe, and there are connections to the events that happened in 1973, but it's not a direct sequel, right? I mean, you could watch this as a standalone. It's a fantastic movie. Brad Dourif's in it as well. There's a Child's Play reference in it too. It's really, really good. Like shockingly good. You know what I'm saying? And of course, it has one of those great jump scares, one of the best jump scares of all time. And you know the one I'm talking about, right? When the nurse comes out of that room and then the patient comes out like this. It's like, oh my God, is it coming? But what's so great about it, this is what makes that moment so great. There's a couple of things. How drawn out it is, how we're just watching from one shot, one still shot. We're watching this moment play out and it's drawn out, right? And it's one of those instances where it's like when, you know, you got to go to the bathroom really bad, but if you wait long enough, you suddenly don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. I mean, you still got to go, but not as bad, right? It's kind of like you cross the threshold and you're like, okay, I don't have to go anymore. No, I can wait. You know, that kind of thing, that kind of phenomena. It's kind of like that, right? Where you're anticipating, right? Because, you know, it's quiet and you're like, okay, something's definitely going to happen. Something's definitely going to happen. And then it goes on for so long that you suddenly go, oh, I guess nothing's going to happen. Oh, there it is. There it is. You know what I mean? That's when they hit you. That's when they hit you, right? And that's a little longer and it might not have been as effective. A little shorter and it might not have been as effective. The timing on this is so important. And also, it's not just that moment playing out. It's also the crash zoom that happens with it. A very old school 70s kind of style thing, right? Where we kind of, you know, we move up like this, right? You see that a lot in, 70s and 80s horror. Certainly in the 70s, you see it a lot. So even though this was a 1990 horror movie, stylistically, that is something that you would definitely have seen, you know, in older films. And obviously they wanted that older school kind of vibe to the picture. So it's the crash zoom as well, right? They are not leaving the audience disconnected from the moment emotionally. They are pulling the trigger on the moment and bringing you in, right? And bringing you into the moment. And that also that should not be understated. That is really important. It's not just the moment and it's not just that, it's the crash zoom that comes with it. Because you remove the crash zoom, it's not nearly as effective. And that brings us to my number 1 jump scare of all time. Well, at least according to this list, today. Ask me again tomorrow or next week and, you know, it might change around a bit. But this is not only one of my favorite jump scares, it's from one of my favorite horror movies of all time. period. And of course, we're going back to 2002 to the American version of The Ring, of course, based on the Japanese film from 1998. The Ring, of course, stars Naomi Watts as Rachel, who is a reporter, I believe, right? And she's investigating this strange videotape and how it supposedly kills you in 7 days and blah, 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 blah. You know the story. This isn't a review. But it's the I saw her face jump scare, right? When Rachel is talking to her sister in the kitchen. I believe they just had the funeral for her niece, Katie, and Katie's mother is doing the dishes. And again, there's nothing that leads you to believe that this, one of the most famous, creepiest, scariest, jump scares / cutaways of all time is about to happen. There's nothing that leads you to believe. There's nothing. Very similar to the What Lies Beneath jump scare. With all the other jump scares you on this list, you can make the argument that there was some, the scene was a little eerie, a little creepy, a little bit something that maybe you're, even on an unconscious level, maybe you're kind of a little on edge. You can make that argument. But in What Lies Beneath, nobody saw it coming. In The Ring, nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw it coming. It's just two women in the kitchen talking about the girl that's died and like, what the hell happened? How does a 16-year-old girl's heart just suddenly stops? Like, what's going on? And then her mother just suddenly stops for a moment and says, I saw her face, and and it just cuts to that moment where we see this 16-year-old girl, Katie, in the closet, this elongated face, gaunt, the life sucked out of her, just her eyes, and it only lasts like 2 seconds. They don't linger on it long enough for you as the audience to get comfortable with it. No. They don't linger on it. It's just there and it's gone and you're like, what the fuck was that? Well, I was just listening to the conversation. What the hell's going on? Or what was that? Right? It's like, oh my God, it's so good. And I stand to be corrected, but I believe those effects were done by the legendary Rick Baker, one of the great special effects makeup artists in cinematic history. It's so effective. It's so effective. And this was before the elongated horror face became a trope in horror movies. We tend to see that a lot. I'm sure there's probably about 6 horror movies a year where, you get the elongated face. And look, if it's done right and it's done well, and depending on the timing, it can absolutely be very effective and very creepy and very eerie and very uncomfortable, 100%. But this was at a time when it wasn't commonplace, at least I hadn't seen it. And it's just like, what is that? Oh, fuck. And it's that thing that I love where it's like, you're just seeing the end result. You're not seeing the process. So it's like, what the fuck happened in this house, in this room, where that is the end result? That is what happened to my little girl. What the fuck happened? Oh my God. Little girl. I mean, she's 16, but you know what I mean, right? It's like, what happened to my teenager? Like, what the hell? Oh my God. And it's just that I saw her face. And it's just the closet opening and her head going, it's like, oh my God. It's like, and then they cut back to the scene you were just watching where you were comfortable. The movie's asking you again to be like, nothing to see here. Let's get back to the conversation. And you're like, you know what I mean? It's so good. One of the great jump scares and visuals to go along with it. One of the creepiest visuals of all time. It's just fantastic. But you have to watch it play out. You can't pause it and look at it and analyze it because, like anything, it becomes less creepy and you become, more desensitized to it the more you watch it or pause it or, whatever. But if you just watch it play out, it still holds up today, man. It's still one of those, like The Exorcist III, like all the jump scares on this list. If you just watch it play out, it still holds up. So that is my number one jump scare on this list, coming from The Ring from 2002. Anyways, folks, my name's Dave McRae. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. What are your favorite jump scares? What's your top 5? What's your top 10? What are just your favorite jump scares in horror movies? Jump into the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. I would love to know. My name's Dave McRae. If you want to follow me on social media, you can. There are my links right there. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. All my links are in the description. Check them out until your heart's content. And when your heart is content, check them out again. That's going to do it for me. In the meantime and in between time, I will talk to you soon. Whew, these jump scares are just... Jump into the comment section below and let me know what makes an effective jump scare for you. That's a good thing to add to the comment you're going to list down below. Anyways, I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.